In the United States, hunting is not a niche hobby. It is an industry, a tradition, and a way of life that involves millions of people. Every year, more than 15 million Americans venture into national forests and hunting grounds. Most of them are not tourists or beginners. These are people who know the area, have been returning to the same areas for decades, and consider such outings a normal part of life. National forests are not wild unknowns. They are working, inhabited territories. And that is precisely why they are dangerous, because the vast majority of fatalities occur not in extreme conditions, but where people are confident that everything is under control. Black Hills National Forest is one such region. It is a popular hunting spot, well known in South Dakota and Wyoming. Convenient access roads, old forest roads, familiar routes. Families hunt here year after year. Here, it is not customary to say, if. Here they say, when. This case is not about a rare tragedy. It is a case that search teams use for training, because there is no sudden storm, no injury, no loss of communication in a split second. There is only one experienced hunter, and one decision that seemed perfectly normal. His name was Wayne Harper. He was 54 years old. He wasn't a lone wolf or an adrenaline junkie. Wayne had been hunting most of his life. He had known the Black Hills for decades. He had been there in winter, spring, and fall. He knew where the deer usually stayed during the cold season, how the wind behaved on the northern slopes, where the snow fell deeper and where it was blown away. He did not treat the forest lightly, but he treated this forest as a familiar place. That is a fundamental difference. It was a typical winter Saturday in December. The temperature was around -10 degrees Celsius. It was cloudy. There were no storm warnings. There was no blizzard. The forecast did not look alarming. This is the kind of weather that most often appears in reports of missing persons. There were no warning signs. Wayne left the house in the morning. He had breakfast. He quickly checked his equipment, as one does before a short outing. He wasn't preparing for a long hunt. He told his wife he would be gone for a short time. He simply said, a couple of hours. No specific route, no estimated time of return. And that didn't seem like a violation either. He had done it so many times before. He was wearing his usual winter hunting clothes, thermal underwear, a fleece layer, a jacket. Warm, but not designed for long periods of immobility in the cold. Standard gloves, a hat, a buff, a small backpack. Inside, the bare minimum: water, snacks, ammunition. He have an emergency kit, a survival blanket, signaling devices, a GPS beacon. He had a phone. But in winter, a phone is no guarantee. It is a temporary resource. He didn't plan to stay overnight. He wasn't prepared for isolation because he saw no reason for it. He left his car at the usual exit. It was a standard hunting spot. Other cars were already parked nearby. This is important. The presence of other cars reduces the subjective sense of risk. People automatically consider the place to be safe. Wayne entered the forest around 10 in the morning. Nothing unusual. Silence. Fresh snow. Good visibility. Searchers would later say, the start of the route looked perfect. He noticed the tracks fairly quickly. Large prints in the fresh snow. Fresh, not blurred by the wind. Typical deer tracks. A little further on, there was fur caught on a bush. It was a clear sign. The animal was nearby. For an experienced hunter, it is not a matter of excitement. It is a matter of responsibility. You can't leave a wounded animal behind. Wayne followed the trail. The weather began to change gradually. Not abruptly, not enough to make him stop and turn around. The wind died down. The cold began to bite harder. Visibility decreased. The gray sky grew denser. This is a typical winter deterioration that most hunters have seen dozens of times. That is precisely why it is dangerous. Wayne kept walking. The deer appeared between the trees unexpectedly. Wayne stopped, took aim, and fired. In winter, the sound of a gunshot is muffled by snow and air. It sounds different than in autumn. The deer jerked and ran to the right, down the slope. A dark spot remained on the snow. Wayne was sure he had hit it. He didn't. Wait. He went after the wounded animal. The deer went into a side valley. From above, it looked harmless. A slight change in the terrain. A familiar landscape. But it is precisely these valleys that become traps in winter. The snow is deeper in them. The cold stagnates in them. The wind changes in them, and visibility is lost. Wayne paused at the edge for just a second. This pause would later feature in the reconstruction as the last moment when he could have turned back without consequences. He went down, and from that moment on, the route ceased to be linear. At this stage, there is still no alarm in the reports. He was not lost. He was not injured. He was not in extreme conditions. He simply took a step away from the familiar line to finish what he had started. At what point would you have turned back? When Wayne descended into the valley, nothing seemed wrong. The snow was deeper, but that was to be expected. The air was colder, but not drastically so. The deer tracks were still visible. It wasn't a sharp break in the route, but a gradual shift, the kind of change that people rarely perceive as dangerous. He continued downhill, controlling his pace. Experience told him not to rush. If you sweat, you'll freeze. He walked confidently, conserving his strength, thinking that in a few minutes he would either see the animal or climb back up the same way. This expectation, a few minutes, would later become key. Losing your bearings doesn't. To start with panic, the ravine turned out to be wider than it looked from above. The terrain began to break up. Small bends, bushes, areas where the snow fell to mid-calf. Movement slowed. The tracks became less clear. Wayne stopped to check the direction. He could see the slope he had descended, but now it looked different. From below, the perspective changes. Familiar landmarks lose their shape. Distances seem different. He did what experienced people do. He tried to reconstruct the picture. He memorized a few trees, a line of bushes, the direction of the wind. It wasn't a mistake. It was an attempt to maintain control. He continued on. The weather continued to deteriorate, too slowly to be frightening. The snow intensified. It wasn't a blizzard. Fine, dry, almost weightless. This is the most dangerous kind of snow. It quickly fills in tracks and smooths out contours. The wind changed direction. In the hollow, it felt weaker but colder. The air became dense and damp. Wayne felt himself cooling faster than he had expected. He picked up his pace. This was the first time his behavior had changed under pressure. Speeding up seemed rational. Get to the wounded animal faster, finish faster, and get back up faster. But speeding up meant more sweat, which meant more heat loss. He didn't yet see this as a problem. The blood ran out suddenly. Not gradually. It just disappeared. The deer tracks also became blurred. The snow was doing its job. Wayne crouched down and ran his hand over the surface, trying to make out the prints. He found a few tracks, but they could have been old. They could have belonged to another animal. He stood up and looked around. For the first time that day, he couldn't see a clear direction. It wasn't the moment of panic. It was a moment of doubt. He circled around, widening his search radius. First a little, then more. He moved slowly, carefully, like a man who was sure the answer was close. But the further he moved from the last footprint, the less familiar the forest became. After a while, Wayne realized that the landmarks he had memorized no longer matched. He saw similar trees, similar bushes, but not the same ones. The ravine turned out to be more complicated than it seemed from above. It branched out, changed shape, and led off to the side. He tried to retrace his steps, and saw that they had almost disappeared. Snow had filled the depressions, and the wind had smoothed the contours. His way back was no longer obvious. This was the first real alarm signal. When people lose their bearings, they often resort to simple logic. If I go up, I'll end up where I came from. This doesn't always work, especially in uneven terrain. Wayne chose to go up the slope that seemed right. He was sure that somewhere up there was the upper edge of the forest, a familiar area, a road. The climb turned out to be harder than he expected. The snow was deep, hiding roots and rocks. He fell several times, hit his knee, cursed, briefly, automatically. His breathing quickened. It was getting warm under his jacket, almost hot. That was a bad sign. The cold was starting to work from the inside. When he stopped to catch his breath, he felt his hands becoming less sensitive. His gloves were no longer as effective as they used to be. The sweat inside his clothes was starting to cool down. He took out his phone to check the time. The screen lit up slowly. The battery was lower than expected. The cold was doing its job. The signal was weak. He decided not to call. This decision would be discussed later, but at that moment it seemed logical. First, I'll get out of here. Then I'll call. He put his phone away. At some point, Wayne lost track of how much time had passed since the shot. In the forest, without clear landmarks, time shrinks. You think 20 minutes have passed when it's been 40. You think it's still early when the day is already ending. The light became flat. The shadows disappeared. Everything around him looked the same gray. He stopped again, and for the first time, he thought not about the wounded animal, but about getting out. This was the point where hunting ceased to be hunting. Wayne knew he should have returned to the car long ago. He understood that the weather was deteriorating. But he also understood that if he turned back now, he might not find his way back as quickly as he had hoped. A dangerous thought arose in his mind. A little more, and everything will become clear. This is the thought that occurs to people before a situation finally spirals out of control. He continued on. At this stage, he still did not consider himself lost. He considered himself temporarily disoriented. This is an important distinction. A lost person seeks help. A disoriented person seeks a solution on their own. But the forest had already stopped responding in the usual way. This is where you, as a listener, begin to ask yourself a question that has no immediate answer. What exactly went wrong if everything seemed normal an hour ago? There is one moment that almost all survivors describe in the same way. It is not panic. It is the feeling that a familiar place no longer meets your expectations. Wayne walked up the slope and noticed little things that had not mattered before. The snow was too even under one tree. The silence was too thick in another place. The usual sounds were missing. No birds, no branches, no echo of footsteps. The forest wasn't doing anything aggressive. It had simply become unresponsive. Wayne stopped again. He turned around slowly, trying to piece together the whole picture. At moments like this, the brain automatically tries to fill in reality. It says, you've seen this place before, just not from this side. But the details didn't add up. The slope was too long. The bushes were denser than you remembered. The trees weren't standing where they should have been near the road or the upper edge of the forest. It wasn't fear. It was bewilderment. It is bewilderment that makes a person keep going instead of stopping and assessing the situation. He took out his phone again. The phone showed even less battery power. The screen responded with a delay. The signal disappeared and reappeared. Wayne raised the phone higher, turned around, took a few steps in one direction, then in the other. Nothing. He could have tried to call. He could have left a voice message. He could have turned on the video recording. People do this instinctively when they feel that the situation is getting out of control. He didn't do that. The reason is simple and frighteningly typical. He still believed that he would solve the problem himself. Mini lesson number 1: experienced people often fall into the trap of thinking, it is not time yet. Beginners panic too early. Experienced people panic too late. When a person is confident in the terrain, they waste precious time trying to regain control instead of assessing the situation and signaling the problem. The snow intensified. Now it fell more densely, filling in the hollows. Wayne's tracks, left an hour ago, were disappearing before his eyes. It is a rare but extremely demoralizing moment when you realize that the ground no longer holds your path. He looked back. There was no line. There was no where he came from. There was just white space between the trees. Wayne felt his movements becoming less precise. He began to stumble more often, catching on roots, sinking into the snow. It didn't seem critical, but his body was already expending more energy than it was receiving. His hands grew numb. His fingers became dull. Small actions required concentration. He caught himself pausing for no reason, just to stand still. This was a dangerous moment. Standing still in winter meant cooling down. A rocky ledge appeared unexpectedly. It was a small shelf, protected from the wind. For a tired person in the cold, such places seem like salvation. Wayne headed for it. On the way, he took off his glove to adjust his backpack strap. Just for a minute, that was enough for his fingers to lose feeling in the fabric. When he put his glove back on, the warmth did not return as before. It was quieter under the ledge. The wind hardly reached it. Wayne leaned against a rock and sat down. It was the first time during the entire trip that he allowed himself a full stop. He ate a snack. He took a few sips of water. He tried to calm his breathing. At this point, people usually think, I'll regain my strength and keep going. But this is where many make a critical mistake. They underestimate how quickly the body loses heat at rest. Wayne thought he would wait out the bad weather. The snowfall seemed temporary. The logic was simple. Wait it out, then go back up when it was easier to navigate. On paper, this decision seems reasonable. In reality, in winter, it only works under one condition. if you have the means to stay warm for a long time. Wayne did not have that. After a while, he felt a strange sense of relief. The cold seemed to have receded. His body stopped resisting. His thoughts slowed down but became more even. This was not an improvement. It was the onset of hypothermia. It is at this stage that people often stop fighting actively. They do not feel the threat as acutely as before. Wayne took out his phone again. The screen lit up and went dark almost immediately. The battery was dead. His connection to the outside world was gone for good. He slowly narrowed down his options. And now the question sounds different. At what point would you admit that the situation is out of control? When Wayne realized that his phone would not turn on again, he was left alone not only physically but also psychologically. Communication, even weak communication, keeps a person feeling that they are still in the system. When the screen goes dark, the world suddenly shrinks to what is around you. The light began to fade earlier than he expected. In winter, twilight comes quickly and quietly. Colors fade, distances become indistinguishable, and the forest turns into a uniform gray mass. Wayne knew that night was approaching, but he underestimated how much it would change everything. He tried to get up and continue climbing. His legs were less responsive. Every step required effort. The snow was still deep, and there were hollows beneath it. He stumbled several times but managed to stay on his feet. His movement became slow and uneven. He stopped again, not because he wanted to, because his body demanded a break. The cold now felt different, not like pain, but like a dull pressure. His fingers could barely feel the straps of his backpack. His thoughts became shorter, simpler. He began to repeat the same phrases to himself, as if it helped to keep his mind in order. He decided to return to the rock ledge. It seemed like a logical decision. It was quieter there. There was less wind. He could wait out the night there and continue in the morning. Many people make this decision, and sometimes it really does save them. But only if they have something that allows them to survive the cold without moving. Wayne sat down again, leaning against a rock. He tried to stay warm by pressing his hands against his body and moving his fingers as much as he could. He knew he could not fall asleep. He forced himself to move, to get up and sit down again. Over time, his movements became less frequent, not because he gave up, but because his body no longer responded as it had before. The night in the forest is always longer than it seems. It does not pass in hours. It stretches from one brief moment of awareness to another. The cold slowly erases the sense of time. Thoughts begin to lose connection with each other. A person may feel a strange calmness that is deceptive. Hypothermia rarely looks dramatic. More often, it looks like fatigue, like the desire to lie down for a bit, like the feeling that everything will be easier if you close your eyes for just a minute. Wayne fought it as best he could, but at night, when unprepared, the odds are always stacked against a person. He was not home in the morning. At first, it seemed like an emergency. He had been out of contact before, but time passed. The car remained in the same place. The phone wasn't answering. By evening, it became clear he hadn't returned. The search began as usual. First, they searched around the car. Then they searched along his presumed route. Local hunters, search and rescue teams, and dogs were called in to help. Black Hills is a place where people understand that you have to search quickly. But the snowfall played its part. The tracks were blurred. The line of movement was broken. The searchers knew that in such conditions, a person rarely goes far in a straight line. More often, they drift, gradually losing direction. They checked the ravines. They checked the shelters. They checked places where a person might try to hide from the wind. On the third day of the search, a dog picked up a faint trail off the main line. It was not a logical direction. It was a small shift that was easy to miss on the map, but in reality meant dozens of meters and the loss of the last chance. First, they found a glove there. Then, a piece of clothing covered with snow. And then, him. He was not in the deepest part of the ravine or at the top of the slope. He was between them, in a place where a person probably tried to climb up, lost strength, and decided to stop for a minute. That minute was his last. The report will simply state the cause of death, hypothermia. But if you analyze this case step by step, it becomes clear that everything was decided long before nightfall. Not the shot, not the weather, not the lack of communication. One step to the side, behind the wound. No emergency kit, slow deterioration of conditions, and the confidence that a familiar place cannot become a trap. At Quiet Fear, we always come back to one question. At what point would you turn back? So, what actually went wrong? When similar cases are discussed during training sessions for search and rescue teams, instructors almost always begin in the same way. They do not ask, "Why did he go there?" They ask, "At what point did the situation become irreversible?" Because in stories like this, there isn't to one disaster. There is a chain of decisions, each of which seems acceptable on its own. Wayne Harper did not blatantly violate basic survival rules. He did not ignore the storm forecast. He did not venture into unknown territory. He was not reckless. His main mistake was psychological. He went into the forest, considering it an extension of his familiar environment, rather than an autonomous risk zone. This is a subtle but critical difference. When a person perceives a place as familiar, they unconsciously lower their level of preparedness. This has been confirmed by research on behavior in outdoor environments. Experience reduces anxiety faster than it reduces risk. The illusion of a short outing arises. The phrase, "for a couple of hours," sounds harmless, but in the conditions of a winter forest, it makes no sense. This is because the duration of the outing is determined not by intention, but by conditions that can change without warning. Wayne did not plan a long outing, which means he did not take what would make an unexpected night survivable rather than fatal. The first lesson here is simple and unpleasant. If you are not prepared to spend the night, you are not even prepared for a short outing. The side ravine is the key point in this case. Search teams know people are drawn to ravines because they are quieter. There is less wind there. It seems safer there, but it is precisely there. The snow is deeper. Orientation is worse. Heat is lost faster. It is more difficult to return along the same route. When Wayne went down after the wounded animal, he didn't just change direction. He changed the type of environment in which the usual landmarks cease to work. And that is the second lesson. A change in micro-relief is a change in the rules of the game. This means that a slow deterioration is the most dangerous scenario. In this case, there was no sudden change in conditions. The weather deteriorated gradually. The wind picked up slowly. The snowfall did not look threatening. It is precisely these scenarios that are most often fatal. A sudden blizzard forces you to turn back. A gradual deterioration makes you want to continue a little longer. Each time, you tell yourself, it is still tolerable, until it is too late. Lesson 3. If conditions are deteriorating slowly, assume you have less time than you think. So why did not he send a signal earlier? This point often raises questions. Why did not he call? Why did not he try to leave a message? Why did not he send a signal while his phone was still working? The answer is not in the technology. The answer is in the thinking. Wayne didn't consider himself lost. He considered himself someone who was still coping. This is a common mistake made by experienced people. They perceive the loss of control as temporary rather than critical. They delay seeking help because they consider it premature. Lesson 4. If you are unsure whether you are lost, you are already lost. Now let's get back to hypothermia. The reports will say one word, hypothermia. But hypothermia isn't sudden death from cold. It is a process that destroys decision-making long before it destroys the body. First, fine motor skills decline. Judgment deteriorates. A false sense of calm sets in. Then, the person pauses for no reason, chooses convenient solutions, loses a sense of urgency, and only then, loss of consciousness. Wayne did not freeze suddenly. He gradually lost the ability to make the right decisions. Lesson 5. When the cold starts to seem tolerable, it is already dangerous. You're probably wondering why they didn't find him where they were looking at first. They didn't find him in the deepest part of the valley or on the ridge. This is also typical. People in a state of hypothermia often change direction without realizing it, move tens of meters away, try to cut the path. This is insignificant for a map. It is critical for a search. A small shift explains why experienced people sometimes end up not there, where it would be logical to look. What makes this case particularly important? This case is not rare. It is typical. That is why it is dangerous. There is no mysticism in it. No strange coincidences. No external threat. There is only a person who is confident in a familiar place. And a force that does not care. We often think that survival depends on strength, endurance, or luck. This case shows otherwise. Survival depends on the moment of reversal. On when you stop the task, acknowledge the change in conditions, choose safety over completing the goal. Wayne Harper did almost everything as usual. And that is exactly what let him down. Because in the wild, business as usual is the most dangerous mode. And now the main question that quiet fear leaves us with after this story. At what point would you have turned back? Before the forest stopped confirming your confidence, or after it became irreversible?
Thank you for watching, guys. See you in next video. Bye bye.